Welcome to class, another episode of Ask the Teacher. And we are here answering questions and helping people build their lives. Today, we have another question from one of our viewers. Beautiful. There's a question on prayer. Does God really answer prayer? Because mimi ni kama ananilenga. Wow, young people na sheng. Does God really answer prayer? Kwa sababu mimi ni kama ananilenga. Now, you ask your questions in Sheng, but I'll answer them in English for the sake of the global village manenos, so that people who are outside the country and would want to listen in can listen in. So this one, the question here is, does God really answer prayer? Because it looks like when I pray, He does not answer. It's a very complex question, especially coming from somebody who might be young in the faith. Because sometimes it is hard to convince them that God answers prayer unless they have seen God answering prayer in their life. Having said that, I would want to answer this question from a little non-conventional way. And I know many people have said God answers prayer all the same. He can say yes, He can say no, He can say wait. That sounds like a good philosophy. But I don't know how well it can get supported by scripture. But I know this for sure about prayer, is that God answers prayer. But I also know for sure, and this is something I would want to pass to everyone who feels like they are praying and God does not answer, is that God is not a DJ. He does not play your requests. There is a threshold that has to be met for prayers to be answered. And that's the threshold I want to address, so that you can always measure yourself against that threshold. The writer of Psalms says, delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. Commit your ways to Him. That should be verse number 5 of chapter number 37 of the book of Psalms. In verse number 4, the writer of Psalms says, delight yourself in the Lord, and He'll give you the desires of your heart. Many times, people confuse that to say that when you delight yourself in the Lord, then whatever you desire, God will give you. Actually, the actual meaning of that verse is that as you delight yourself in the Lord, as you make God the center of your life, as you make God the most important thing in your life, then God will drop desires in your heart. He will give you the desires of your heart. He will give your heart something to desire. So that now the desires that you have are born of God. Then verse number 5 says, commit your ways. So those desires now start dictating what you can do and what you cannot do. Then now you commit that to God. But the desire is born of God. Why do I say that's what it means? Because you go now to the disciples of Jesus, and in 1 John chapter number 5, when the Apostle John starts to speak about prayer in verse number 14, he says, this is the confidence that we have in Him. 1 John chapter number 5, verse number 14. This is the confidence that we have in Him, that if we ask anything according to His will, He hears us. And we know that if He hears us, then we have everything that we asked of Him. In other words, John puts a caveat. We don't just ask anything, but we ask anything according to His will. How do we get to know the will of God? How does the will of God get established in our lives? It is when we delight ourselves in the Lord. Or like when Paul says to the Romans in chapter number 12 and verse number 2, do not be conformed to the standards of this world, because when you are conformed to the standards of this world, then you desire what is of the world. So Paul says, do not be conformed to the standards of this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. Then you will know the will of God, the good, the acceptable, and the perfect will of God. In other words, there is a work that needs to happen in your mind, a renewal, so that you can know the will of God. And that is what the writer of Psalms talks about. You delight in the Lord. You make God the center of your life. Then He drops desires in your heart. Your mind is renewed. So when you come to prayer, then you are not praying from your fleshly desires. You are praying from a place of the Spirit where God has dropped a desire in your heart. And so when you are speaking to God, you are speaking to Him what He has already intentioned. That's parameter one. Parameter two is always to ask yourself, what does the scripture say concerning these things? When you have no inner conviction that this is exactly the will of God and you have no pointers, then there are scriptural pointers. What does the scripture say about some of these things? That way then, you pray the will of God concerning your life and you don't get disappointed when you feel that He doesn't answer. So yes, God answers prayer. And yes, He answers prayers that are prayed according to His will. Like Jesus said, seek ye first the kingdom, and all these things will be added unto you. Matthew 6:33. So what you need to do is that you need to immerse yourself to that place where God actually now drops His desires in your heart, and your heart's desires are God's heart's desires. You and God, your hearts are beating the same. That time you speak to Him, you are only speaking to Him what He's already dropped in you. It becomes easy and prayers are answered. That's what the teacher has to say.